Okay, so we're back from our test flight, and the TinyGo 4K did a superb job, guys. I'm lost for words, guys, because I didn't expect this thing to perform this well. So let's talk about my experience. So I was able to fly this drone over a period of days, and as you saw in the introduction video, this thing was silky smooth. Now that was actually my second flight. Now my first flight, I took this up, and as soon as I took off, I could see a lot of micro vibrations in the image, both in the FPV and in the DVR footage. I really wasn't satisfied with that image, although it wasn't even stabilized yet. So I decided to bring the drone back in and make some minor changes to the drone. So as you saw in the install video, I actually installed a larger, more premium antenna on here. But because this one's a little bit bigger and top heavy, I did feel that this might have been playing a role in causing some oscillations in the flight footage. So I put the original antenna on here. It's very, very small, very, very light, weighs next to nothing, as well as change the battery position. Now, I made sure the battery was center of the drone so that the CG was okay, so the motors didn't have to spin too hard to keep this thing balanced. I went for a second flight, which is the video you saw, and it was significantly better, guys. But I still wasn't satisfied. I did notice that there was some pitch up action in my drone, so I came back and I recalibrated the gyro on the flight controller. So I came back to the studio, put the footage into Gyroflow, rendered it, and it was terrible, guys. This thing was horrific, a lot of shakes. In fact, I think the Gyroflow was doing more harm than good. So yeah, it was pretty bad. So I played with Gyroflow a little bit longer, and I got it to a point where it was really good, and that's what you saw in the intro video. Now that took a little bit of tweaking and just messing around with the settings, but it finally turned out really well. At that point, I was so excited, so pumped that that image was so smooth that I took a few more batteries, went outside and flew it some more, guys. I was so motivated to fly this thing. I was just so pleased by the image coming from this small, tiny drone, guys. Now, as I said before, the video here was surprisingly good, especially considering the fact that this is all stock factory settings. Now, you have the potential here to add this joystick right here, and you can change the camera settings on here. As you saw in the install video, I did have a loose wire for this controller. This port right here was loose, so I did resolder it back to the actual DVR board. And sure enough, I plugged this in here, and the joystick did not work. Now, I don't think that's the deal with this joystick. This is the first time I'm using this joystick since I bought this TinyGo. But I do think the other wire that I didn't solder, or the other wire that looked attached, maybe lost connection in there. But that's scary impressive, guys. The fact that I ran this on just stock settings, 2.7K, and just the factory settings, and the image looked that good. Now, because of that, I'm being so excited. Now, I began to treat this drone a little bit different. As I said before, this is actually my first drone. This is actually the first one I bought in FPV. Now, as I flew this for this purpose, my perception of the drone began to change. I began to increase my standard and the standard for this drone. It's kind of weird, to the point where now I'm nitpicking every little aspect of the drone. Now, as you can see, as I was flying this in the bright daytime sunlight, this thing was susceptible, just like other cameras, to the bright light. Now that means that the shutter speed had to be increased. Therefore, you can see a lot of little micro vibrations and a little bit of jello in there. Hence the reason why I was saying I wish there was a ND filter on this. Now, I did look all over the internet, and Caddx does not make an ND filter for this size of camera. Now, they probably made this camera and DVR setup for TinyWhoop, just like this drone here, not knowing that people might eventually want to use it as a cinematic whoop or cinematic beast or tool for shooting cinematic videos. And to think about it, there wasn't anything such as Gyroflow at the time. Now, talking about Gyroflow and Gyroflow not existing when this camera first came out, I've used Gyroflow numerous times in the past, and it's been kind of finicky. I've never gotten really good, smooth cinematic results. I don't know if that's to do with the other cameras, their settings, or their gyroscopic information, but in this case, I had really good success with this drone and Gyroflow. Now, I have to admit, the gyro information coming from this flight controller, it's really good and better than I've used in the past with other cameras. It's clean, there's really no spikes in there, there's really no drop frames as well. So the information here, as long as you have it matched up to your video, it's gonna sync up perfectly, guys. Now, as you saw, the image from the TinyGo and the lowest camera was pretty good. As you saw, really, really good image. Now, it looked really good, but it wasn't easy to get that image. So let's talk about some of the things you want to consider if you're going to convert your drone to this, or use this camera setup for your other drones. Now the first thing deals with the data log. Now the way this is hooked up in here and the way it works in Betaflight is that once you power on the drone, this is also powered, but it is not logging at the time. This device actually logs only when you arm the drone, which is typical of any other Betaflight drone. Now you can assign that to a switch as well, which you might want to consider, but I didn't want to have that potential where I can forget putting the switch on to have it recording. So once I arm the drone, it records automatically. But why is that important? That's crucial because the difference is with this DVR, once you power on the drone, it starts to record. And there'll be a difference in time from when this DVR starts recording to when the SD card or the data log starts recording. So when I put this information in Gyroflow, it didn't sync up automatically. I think that gap is too big. Now it's pretty simple to compensate for that. In Gyroflow, there's a tab called Rough Gyro Offset, and you can just put that difference in time between when this DVR starts and when your SD card starts to record the gyro data. So the second thing you want to consider when using this setup is to keep track of your data logs. Now, this logger does not have any timestamps or date stamps. It just names the files from 0 all the way to your last file. So you might have 20 flights or 20 logs in the past 3 days, and there's no way to decipher which one relates to your video in your DVR or the video in your actual SD card right here. So I suggest after a day of flying, you just download your footage from your DVR as well as the file off the SD card, especially the ones in your logs, your gyro logs, and put it into a specific folder with days on there. The third thing to consider is to recalibrate your gyro. Now, if you don't have any flight problems like I did, then you might not want to do that. But in my case, I don't think I've ever, or maybe once or twice, I've recalibrated the gyro on here. But recalibrating the gyro makes sure it knows what's level of flight, as well as sending accurate information to the log or the SD card in the back here. So you do want to do that. All right, last but not least, the last thing you want to consider is having the proper lens profile for this drone here. Now, if you go in Gyroflow, depending on what version you have, there's an official release right now. I think I use 1.2. But I noticed even in the older release candidates that there was a lens profile for this camera. Now, this is the Caddx lowest camera on here. This is a 4K camera, and there's different profiles I saw in Gyroflow if you have different resolutions, whether you want to use 4K or even 2.7K. In this case, I did fly this at 2.7K. And as you can see, the image turned out really well. That's gonna help with the warp image on here. This is a very, very wide lens. This, I think, is 155 degrees. And having the right lens profile on here helps both with straightening that out, as well as the Gyroflow actually figuring out the optical points from your camera. So as you can see, if you don't put a profile on there, it will say it might not be the smoothest image. So just remember that, and luckily for us, this is an older camera, so that was already in Gyroflow. Now, talking about Gyroflow, all the settings in there, I know a lot of people are gonna ask what are my settings that I use for this setup right here for the TinyGo. Now, this is completely stock. I did record at 2.7K, so you do know my lens profile. As you can see, this is just what I use. It's not perfect. I'm sure I can tweak it a little bit more. And as you can see also in the low pass filter, it shows 1000. I intend to put 100 in there, and it showed 1000, and the image still came out really good. That just shows you the accuracy and the precision of the gyros in this drone. The gyros on here are pretty good. Besides that, I did experiment with dynamic zoom in on later flights, and that worked pretty well. That kind of eliminates the black bars in the top or on the side from showing on your image, and it wasn't too aggressive, guys. Now, as well as that, you can see that the lens profile or the lens strength correction was very low. I just wanted a natural but smooth image, and I really got that, guys. Really impressive. So having said all that, was it worth putting this data logger on my TinyGo? Absolutely, guys. The combination of this 4K camera, this wide field of view, and this lightweight data logger makes this the perfect drone now, guys. As I said, my perception on this is totally different. And the performance coming out of this camera and setup is similar to really high-end action camera on bigger TinyWhoops, guys, for less than half the price of those setups. We're talking about a drone that came in an RTF kit, guys. An RTF kit. Now, unfortunately, you can't buy this drone by itself. The closest thing to this is the Thinkin P16, and that has, I think, a DJI Air unit. So it is a digital camera setup. This is pure analog, and this whole thing is significantly light and really affordable. Now, believe it or not, having seen the footage coming from this small whoop, I do believe that this drone here can hang or at least compete with some of the larger action camera CineWhoops on the market. And that's what we intend to do in our next few videos. We're gonna compare the TinyWhoop to these larger purpose-built CineWhoops on the market. So if you want to see that video, hit that subscribe button there for you to be notified whenever I do drop that video. Now, talking about that, I've done numerous videos, and I mean a lot of videos on this TinyWhoop right here, the TinyGo 4K. I'll leave those videos linked right here. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.